So I've got about 45 minutes to try to share with you what we have seen as the things that work, the things that tend not to work. We are the largest and fastest growing not-for-profit organisation for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and we see a lot of companies coming in, and that's the experience that we want to share with you today, the best practices of what works and what tends not to work. So if you look at the US overall, this is from the World Bank, and in ease of doing business it ranks number 3, a little bit ahead of Canada and just behind New Zealand in the world as being a place where it's easy to do business. When you're starting a company, you can set up a company very, very quickly. It's relatively simple, relatively cheap, very straightforward. On employment, little bit different from here, certainly different from Europe, where people are used to having employment contracts. There are very, very few employment contracts. It's called at will. So what that means is, on the basis of the law, you can be hired and fired at will at a moment's notice. If your employer doesn't like your face, doesn't like the way you dress, they can hire and fire you. In practice, it doesn't work like that. There are certain areas that you can't do. So if you're over 40, it's difficult to fire people because that's age discrimination. If they're female, it's sex discrimination. And minority, that's minority discrimination. So when you go down there, what you want to do is employ young white males, because then you can hire and fire them at will. You know, it's just really simple. So what do we see as common approaches to entering the US market? And these are sort of comments that we hear all the time. We just need a partner. We can sell to most verticals. We'll just hire more staff locally, and we only need a modest percentage of the market. So these are very, very common, and the track record of these is that most companies fail to gain traction. It's not unusual for less than 1 in 10 to actually be successful in coming to a different country. The reason for that is that they generally look at it as tactical sales rather than a strategic imperative that their business has to succeed at, and this seldom works. And the wrong personnel is very often what we see, particularly with startups or companies coming from Asia and Europe. They will frequently get a young, enthusiastic engineer who has some English and send them over. That person has never done a sales call in their life, doesn't understand how to evaluate a market. They're on their own in an unknown world, and they're sent over for 3 to 6 months, and they're told to go and get sales. And that's just what we would call a hospital pass for those people. There's no chance of success for that. And that person gets more and more isolated, more and more has these long and heart-aching phone calls with the people back in the home country, and it just doesn't work. If they're unfamiliar with the local legal, business and custom needs and culture, again, that's extremely common. They haven't evaluated what's different, what's necessary, and consequently they're trying to sell a product that was designed for the home market. It's not a good fit for the current market. Think about it. No one vehicle is a total global vehicle. They're all slightly different for different markets, different geographic markets. Same with cell phones, same with software. They're all generally slightly different. And that's something that you have to be aware of. You almost certainly have to alter your product for the market that you're going into. And little or no planning. From where I am sat here, North America looks like a huge market, or the US looks like a huge market. Let's just go over there and make some sales. We know there's at least 200 companies in there that we can do business with. Let's just send this bright young engineer, let's go over there, they'll get some business. Just talking of which, just a show of hands please, how many people are selling business to business in the room? So the rest of you are business to consumer, would that be right, business to consumer? Yeah, okay. And insufficient funding. Again, just doing it in a very tactical way rather than as a strategic way. Whereas the observed factors for success, we've seen that it's viewed as a strategic imperative for the business. If you're in Israel, if you're in Finland, you don't have a local market worth talking about. They're very, very small. You have no other option but to expand outside that market. So right from the get-go, your strategic imperative is you have to find a way to gain access to bigger markets and get out there and make it happen. No other way that you're going to be successful. Having done that, they develop strategic plans, and they frequently leverage local networks, as is now happening with the C100 here. So organizations like Thai, Israel, with the links that they have, the Finns are doing the same sort of thing. It gives you a great way to leverage local people on the ground who do understand the local culture, the legal aspects, blah, 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 blah. And developing a strategic plan is a very important part of that. Having done that strategic plan, you then say, okay, we will commit the appropriate time and resources to it. We'll talk a bit more about time and resources as we go through. But if you don't commit the time and resources, again, you're setting yourself up for failure. So using part of that time and part of that resources to evaluate the local market and understand the local conditions that you have. So the 3 months that the Canadian Consulate is offering in plug and play, that in my mind is not an opportunity for you to go and get business. That's an opportunity for you to go down there relatively cheaply and evaluate the market. If you're selling business to business from up here, you should be able to identify 30 companies that would be your top prospects that you should be able to go to figure out, can I get business associated with those over the longer term. You can go and knock on doors and figure out maybe which of the 10 or 12 of those are really worth you focusing your time on. If it's consumer, again, give you time to go down and evaluate what are consumers looking for down there, what competition do you have down there, to see again how you have to tweak your product to meet the needs and to give you a path through the competition. The best people in the most important market. This is sometimes a very difficult thing for startup companies to grasp. Most of the time that we see success is where, having evaluated a market, and let's say between Canada and the US, it's a 10 times bigger market in terms of the people, 300,000 versus 300 million versus 30 million. If it's a 10 times bigger market for you, where are you going to put your best people? You need to put your best people in that market. It doesn't mean to say that you have to put your development team there. It doesn't mean to say you have to put your operations team there. It doesn't mean to say that you have to put all your management team there. But you've got to have a real presence on the ground to be able to interface with the customers, to again understand firsthand what the market is doing, and if you're looking for investment, to interface with the investors down there. So understanding your market as a first pass is something that I'm sure you all know about, but just to give an illustration of what it might be, are these people, are your customers people who can serve themselves? They can just go along the shelf and pick off what they want? Do they need some help in understanding what it is that you're offering them? You have several different things that are available from competitors, maybe even available from your portfolio. Do they need some help in understanding what it is? Or are these the type of people that you have to hold their hand and polish their nails and give them a really, really handheld personal experience before they'll engage with you? You know they're looking for a sweet fruit, but is it an apple? Is it an orange? Is it an apricot? Or is it something completely different that is different from what you're doing in your local market? Is there an 800-pound gorilla that's dominating that market? Are you going to be producing software that goes head-to-head with Microsoft, microprocessors that go head-to-head with Intel? So is there a likelihood you're going to get crushed? Are there 3, 4, 5 top players in the market? Have they got it all covered, or is there a 10 to 15% of the market left that they're not going after that you can sneak into? Or is it a totally fragmented market with no clear winners you can easily start making your way into? And once you've done that, can you develop a scalable business model that fits that market? It may be very, very different from the business model that you have here. The This is a critically important thing. We see this time and time again, particularly with companies coming from Asia. The business model they have in Asia does not fit the local American markets. I'm sure there'll be some differences between Canada and the US also. Having done that, you then got to figure out, okay, what resources do I really need to make this happen? Where you fit in the value chain, it may be that you have to serve an apprenticeship. This is certainly, in the examples that I've got, something that we see very regularly. You like to be at the top. You like to be, that's where the most profit, the most revenue is, but you've probably got to serve an apprenticeship. You've got to come in and do stuff at a lower level. You might want to have Microsoft and Cisco and Google as customers. You might want their customer base as customers, but you may have to start lower down and work your way up, prove that you can do things before you can get through into those bigger companies. For example, offshore software development. This is something that's very popular in Silicon Valley. We have offshore software developers from just about every country in the world. They've all got the best engineering talent in the world. This is better than everybody else. They've all got PhDs. They all work 24 hours a day, blah, 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 blah. For those types of companies, we see that it generally takes 2 to 4 years for the ones that do succeed to establish themselves there. And that's because they serve the apprenticeship of going in to work with companies that have to outsource stuff and build up a track record before they can work their way up the value chain to getting into the IT consulting and strategy levels where they have the real revenue and profit and interest that they're looking for. Another example is wireless games. And this is a huge and growing market, one of the most exciting markets out there. But it's a very complicated market. Who do you engage with? This was very quickly. Some of the names that are involved in that market, some of the roles that they take, and how do you know who you should engage with unless you go and do hands-on work within there to figure out who are the really critical partners you have to have, who has to get into your site, who has to want to buy what it is that you've got. I don't claim to understand this market in any way whatsoever. It's very complicated. There are key players. Everyone is to some extent bigger than you are. And they can make or break your company in terms of the success. So what we've seen as a success factor in the early stages is when companies coming into Silicon Valley treat this effectively as a startup. And when you're in startup mode, you don't try to use third-party sales channels, because third-party sales channels typically do not create demand. They don't do missionary work. They can fulfill demand, but you have to create that demand for them. So in the first instances, when you're engaging with the early adopters, before you're crossing the chasm into volume sales, this of course is taken from Geoffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm. If you haven't read it, I suggest that you do. Not only has he got Crossing the Chasm book, but if you go to his website, he's got a white paper, Crossing the Chasm 2.0, which is well worth reading, which evaluates what's happening more in the current market. Then direct sales is the way to go, so that you, as the executive team, understand intimately what the pain is the customer has, the type of solution that they're looking for, how much they want to pay for it, how they want it delivered to them, and how they want to pay for it. Unless you know that intimately, personally, it's very, very difficult for you to translate that to your sales force as you grow. Asking a third-party channel to do that for you is almost guaranteed not to work in the first instances. This is another way of looking at it by the maturity of the market, and markets that are most open to new entrants are emerging markets and, funnily enough, declining markets. Mass markets and established markets tend to go with brand names that have already been established. It's very, very difficult to crack those markets. So understanding where your product is in the market cycle is also an interesting factor that you need to factor in there. And how long is your sales cycle? The cliche for this is 60 days, selling business to business. I see between 500 and 700 executive summaries every year. And the ones that sell business to business, almost every one of them says, our sales cycle is 60 to 90 days. And when they tell me that, I know they're either kidding themselves or they've never been out to make a sale, because it just doesn't happen that fast. These same steps are true in business to consumer also. They can be a lot shorter, but they still go through exactly the same processes, which is you've got to connect with the company, they've got to consider whether they want to actually deal with you, evaluate it and purchase. Business to business, business to consumer, just even establishing that they know that you exist can take anywhere from 3 months to a year. Once they understand that you exist, you then got to convince them to even consider giving you an opportunity. That again can take some time. They then have to evaluate, either by going onto the internet and looking at what do people think of your product and the various sites you can go to look at that, or alternatively getting your product in-house and evaluating it. I've personally delivered microprocessor development systems to companies that have said they wanted to evaluate it, and I've gone back 90 days later, 6 months later, 9 months later, 12 months later, and they're still sat in the corner gathering dust. So unless there's a real imperative strategic impact for them to get involved in it, this can go from 3 months to infinity. And then finally, if you get through that, and yes, it's okay, we're going to buy this, either on a consumer level or at particularly a business to business level, it goes into the purchasing department, which in my case might be I go and ask my wife if I can do it. Or if you're in business, then you go to the purchasing department. Now the purchasing department, their role in life is to keep their job, of course, and they want to be able to show to management that they can buy whatever it is that you're offering cheaper, faster, more conveniently than from the source that the engineers have said we'd like to buy it from. So they get really ticked off when the only place they can buy it from is your company. So having tried to find ways around that for probably 60 days or so, then they do have this final little trick up their sleeves, which is, I'm sorry, it's not in the budget. And as most budgets are done annually in most companies, then that means you've averagely got a 6 months wait. So if you're selling business to business in a new market, this can not unreasonably take 18 to 24 months to make your first sale. Selling to consumer, you can do consumer selling from here. You don't need to make the move. But nevertheless, there are still those steps that you have to go through in the consumer market. And unless you understand that very clearly and understand what your sales cycle is and your cost of acquisition of those customers, can you actually acquire a customer and get them to commit more to you in terms of revenue than it costs you to get them, then you're really treading on dangerous ground. So again, just to summarize this, what we've seen fail, shortcuts. Consultants, distributors, commission-only reps tend not to work. They've got to put food on their own tables. Their ideal scenario is that they can walk into a purchasing office and they can write an order for whatever it is the buyer wants to buy that day. They don't want to do missionary work. They can't afford to wait 2 years to get their first order. The budget approach, sending over an engineer for 6 months, expecting incremental sales, just doesn't work. Selling existing products into the local market without understanding what the local market needs, how it wants to buy it, how much it's prepared to pay for it, how it wants to pay for it. Those are steps that can set you back a long way. And recruitment of uncommitted local talent is something that most people don't think about. I'm from London, so coming to the States, typically when you're from Europe, you downplay your capabilities. So when people would ask, what have I done? Oh, started a couple of companies, reasonably successful, it was okay. You just sort of downplay it. If you're an American, you go, yeah, I've done 15 companies and we took to the moon and we did this and we bought these things and it was fabulous. Americans interview very, very well, particularly American salespeople. You go, wow, these guys are incredible. They are going to get us off the ground. The reality is, unless they're committed to your company, what will happen is that, remember, it's a 2-year sales cycle, selling business to business. Then for at least a 12-month period, they can send you in reports that show you the sales funnel, but no actual sales happen. Because what they're doing is they have no commitment to your company. There's 10% or more unemployment in the USA at the moment. So they've taken a job that's not paying them what they'd like because you can't pay top dollar. So you're paying a reasonable salary with some commission on top of it. But it stops the bleeding out of their bank account until they can find the job that they really want. So be very, very wary of uncommitted local talent. They will interview extremely well. The likelihood is they will not deliver on that promise. So what we've seen work, a committed local is part of the early founding team. In Silicon Valley, more than 70% of the startup companies that we see have first-generation immigrants as part of their executive teams. That is a tremendous advantage when those companies decide to go internationally, if they're going back to the countries those people came from. Helps hugely. They understand the market, they understand the product, they understand how people like to buy stuff. If you don't have that luxury, then your challenge is to find a local that you can infect with the commitment to your company. That generally means you've got to bring them into your current headquarters area for maybe 90 days, maybe even longer than that, to get them really becoming part of the ecosystem of your company. Get them really infected to it. Treat it as a startup, not as a sales expansion exercise. So do all the things that a startup would do. Evaluate the market, see what the opportunities are, understand from the customers which are the ones that you really have to get as reference customers, understand how they want the product delivered to them, what's the good product market fit, blah, 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 blah. Come up with a plan to make it happen. So do that detailed hands-on market evaluation, identify the key reference customers, localize your product and positioning, and then put the investment in time and resource to acquire those reference customers. So let's give you an example, a company called Transitive. Transitive developed software to transfer software at the machine code level from one microprocessor platform to another microprocessor platform. I thought this had died out with the advent of high-level languages. Apparently not. They were founded in 2000 at Manchester University, which is where I got my degree in computer science. So obviously it's bound to be good. The US market they saw as a strategic imperative. This was quite interesting for them. A bunch of very smart people at the university, and they did an evaluation. If they were to do it in Europe, Europe is so fragmented. So the only way we can do this is through having distribution or rep channels in each country, and it's going to be all half-assed and it's not going to really work, and we'll be lucky if we get to be a $5 to $10 million company. But that could be okay if we're okay, and it takes it off our hands, but it'll be fine. The other thing is we could go to North America and we could be $100, maybe $200 million company, because that's where the action is. And they decided, okay, that's the way we want to go. Therefore, being successful in the USA becomes a strategic imperative to us. Because of their track record in developing stuff at Manchester University, they were able to get some initial funding from Pond Ventures. Pond Ventures is one of 3 VC firms that I'm aware of that specialize in taking European technology into North America. It's very, very difficult. The success rate is low, and that's why there's only 3. They created an HQ in Silicon Valley. They said, okay, if this is strategically important to us, this is our market, this is the market we have to crack, then we've got to put our best people here. We're going to put our headquarters there. They did that from 2001 to 2002. The reason it took so long is it took them 18 months to find a local CEO. And that's what they were looking for, was a CEO quality person. Pond Ventures was able to help them with that, and they found a serial entrepreneur with a terrific track record. Having got a CEO like that, having been able to recruit and attract that person to them, they were able to get follow-on funding from Crescendo Ventures and Accel, because as luck would have it, and it was huge luck, they came across another company that also had a strategic imperative to transfer gigabytes of software from the Motorola platform to an Intel platform. That was strategically imperative to that company. Transitive had a solution to it, so the sun, the moon, and the stars lined up, and they had a terrific customer, which enabled them to acquire Apple as their first customer in 2005. Now, there's not many better reference customers than Apple that you could possibly have, but look how long it took them to do that. Founded in 2000, decided to come to the States, and took 18 months to get a CEO and set up a headquarters, then took a further 3 years to make their first sale. That's the time and commitment that you're looking at. They've subsequently acquired other customers with big names as they're going forward. Could we switch to the eFox presentation? And does this work the same way? Terrific, thank you. So this is a different company. This was founded by a buddy of mine, Andrew Roberts. He's an Australian. This is the only job he's ever had. He founded eFox straight out of university, and he left university early. I think he was about 20 when he did it. And he'd originally put together a slightly different presentation for me. He very kindly put this together specifically for this trip. He also likes to take the mick out of me. When I first met him, we talked a lot about product market fit. The product he developed in Australia wasn't a very good fit for the US market. And he said, okay, if you think our product was bad, how the hell can you have solar-powered parking systems in the heart of London? There's no freaking sun there. You know? So that's a dig at me. What they do is they make editing software for web-based systems. Doesn't really matter what they do. But he got into Startup 1.0 in just around the dot-com boom time in Australia, because at that time, any company like Pets.com, was bound to be going to make billions of dollars. He was able to raise some money from his friends and family. They had a product launch and were absolutely staggered that not only did they get orders from companies in Australia, they also got some orders from companies around the world. Then they had near-death 1.0. There was the dot-com bust, followed by the September 11 with the UN towers, and so they went into immediate cash flow crisis. And Andrew, being young and unproven, decided he was not the right person to be the CEO under these circumstances. He was able to get some more money from friends and family, so he did Startup 2.0. He hired a professional CEO with that extra money, and he recognized that Australia, with only 10 million people, was not going to be the market for his product. He had to go outside of that. He'd had some interest from the US, so he decided that he has to come to the US market. He went on an Austrade high-tech tour, which is where I first met him. And that's a tour similar to what the consulate is organizing. And he was able to get some interest in some key OEM agreements. Didn't sign them up, but he had some interest. So given this, he decided it was a strategic imperative for him to move to the US. Then he had near-death 2.0. He was able to sign up a couple of OEM agreements for his software, but very shortly afterwards, the largest CEO terminated. At that time, because there was no more money left in the coffer, they were in a cash flow crisis yet again, the uncommitted CEO and uncommitted COO said, "You can't pay us, we're quitting, we're out of here." And the new product that they had been developing to attack the North American market didn't take off. So this is one resilient guy. He's had 2 death experiences. Remember, he's never worked before in his life. He's already had 2 near-death experiences, so he does Startup 3.0. And fortunately for him, the web content market starts to revive. Based upon the experience that they'd gained, they were able to pull together a sales and marketing team to start selling into the markets that they had identified as the right market. They felt they had a good product fit, and they knew how to sell, so they could pass that on to new people coming in. The sales began to take off, and they began to build a strong relationship with IBM. Then there was near-death 3. I mean, this is all these things are beyond your control. How you respond to them will make the difference between success and failure. He decided that he'd cracked the US market. He saw that there was some interest in their products from the European market, so he decided he was going to go and take on Europe in a similar way to what he'd done with the US. So he decided he had to move to the UK. He started to invest in his time, money, his time and energy to go out there and find out what was going on. And before he knew what was happening, the global financial crisis came along, which put a block on pretty much everything. And their sales dropped by 50%. That's huge. So what does he do? He does Startup 4.0. I mean, this guy never stops. He's the Energizer Bunny. He just gets going. They were able to conclude an agreement with IBM. He believes global recovery is happening because certainly he's starting to see an uplift in sales. Instead of trying to crack the whole of Europe in one go, he said, okay, I'll do this step by step. Let's open a UK office. We'll just do the UK. His time there, he was able to identify a couple of really interesting people, particularly in one company, Web Radar, which he said, okay, cheapest way and simplest way and the best way to do this, and also give me a customer base, I'll acquire them. So that was what he did there. That's how their revenue grew, even with the near-death experiences. They've almost always had consistent growth. Don't worry about rule of 20. He does how he thinks. So I asked him, what do you think is really critical? For him, because he's white labeling stuff, his stuff is white labeled out to other people, he needs OEM agreements. The partnerships that he developed were absolutely critical. The one with IBM was hugely critical for him. I mean, what a reference customer to have. He firmly believed you had to move to your market, and this is the truck he hired to move his belongings there when he turned up on a boat or on an aeroplane. He says that is the actual truck that got him to his first apartment in San Francisco. You've got to move to your market. You've got to build a great team. He takes a long time to recruit people. He gets to know people really, really well. Not only does he interview them in his office, he takes them out for dinner. He takes them out for a beer. He'll meet them for breakfast. He'll put them in conditions that make them a little bit uncertain and nervous of themselves. He was telling me, and he wasn't boasting about it or anything, he's saying, geez, this is so strange. 2 weeks ago, I reduced a person who had come to interview as being a salesman. I reduced the salesman to tears merely by pushing back on him and asking him how he was going to sell in the face of competition, how he's going to sell with pushback from the customer. This guy had obviously never had that circumstance. This is a guy who gets people who commit themselves to him, they really like him, they like the company, they make it happen. By the way, that's Andrew. So that's Andrew. I don't think he's even 30 yet. He's a terrific guy. So he knows how to build a strong team. I got to say, I think this is absolutely true. Attitude is a whole difference. So that's a statue of Churchill that he photographed when he was in the UK, and that is his real dog there. He fell in love with British Bulldogs. But he's had near death 4 times. The guy is one resilient guy. We see time and time again with startups, with companies coming into the US, that people give up too soon. They give up when they're 80%, 90% of the way there. If you keep carrying on, you keep cracking your way through, then often you can be successful. That's what Andrew has there. It's not necessarily a commitment to, it's my product. It's a commitment to providing value to the customer. So it's a different sort of way of doing it. So that's eFox. You can switch back very quickly to the other. Finish the other one off, please. Back to where it was. Yeah. So let's go. Transitive we've already done. It's not moving forward. Here we go. So we've done all that. Okay. So what if you're looking for funding too, which is a question that comes up quite a lot. Until relatively recently, my answer would have been, you need to establish a US-based HQ. That may be changing. For a start, the tax laws in Canada have changed, making it easier for cross-border investors to get their money out, which was a big barrier in the past. And also, the consulate is working with groups of investors on the East Coast and the West Coast to see if there's ways that they can do it. It's not covered yet, but they are working on it, and there's high hopes of something freeing up in the next several months. You have lots of local competition. There are over 400,000 engineers and technologists in Silicon Valley, which is where most entrepreneurs and startups come from. You've also got all the big established companies. At any one time, there are 6,000 business plans floating around Silicon Valley. There's huge competition there. Do not underestimate it. Everybody is after that. And every month, we see companies coming from all over the world. Name your country, they're all coming. Because it's an area that has so much pull to it. So you have lots and lots of competition. And finally, are you really fundable? Investors look for anywhere from, if you're in the life sciences area, a 3 to 5 times return on investment over quite an extended period, 5-7 years. In the ICT area, they'd like to see 10 to 30 times the return on investment over a 5 to 7 year period. So that's something that you have to be very certain that your company looks like if you're looking to get venture funding from Silicon Valley. If you don't look like that, don't waste your time, because it can suck up a huge amount of time. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with not being venture fundable. We go back to eFox, they're now on a run rate for $10 million. He's highly profitable. He personally takes home in his pocket over $500,000 every year. I could live on that. That's okay. You can do that. The only venture money he took was from some friends and family. Now he gets VCs knocking on his door every week, wanting to put more money into him. But he now has the option. He can decide, am I happy being a company that I can keep growing organically, maybe up to 20, 30, 40, 50 million? Or will I take the venture capital to give me rocket fuel to go to be a $200 million company in a very short space of time? Nothing wrong in either of those approaches. Remember, some of the biggest names out there, Microsoft, Google, never took huge amounts of venture capital money. You don't need to do that. So do decide which way you want to go. That's it. I'm out of time. I understand that. I mean, given the signals. So thank you very much for your attention. I do appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking with you.